Hello, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. In segment number 1, we've got a new court case involving players that are looking for eligibility in college basketball. Shock, surprise there. So we'll dive into that a little bit, see if there's any chance whatsoever, if there might be any of these guys that might be able to gain some eligibility and just what this injunction means in general. And then in segment number 2, our good friend Ryan McIntyre, he does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. He's going to be joining me. We're going to be talking about a little bit of everything. We're going to be talking about the Big 12 and their landscape. We are additionally going to be taking a look at what we've all got in terms of some of these conferences that have put some money into their college basketball programs. The Atlantic 10 has certainly been one of them, and we do need to talk about James Nagy heading on over to George Mason as well. We'll talk a little Southland and so much more. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_D1. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So, as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And your Twitter/X questions help me know what you want to be hearing a little bit more on this podcast. So I do beg with you, I do plead with you, please do send in these Twitter/X questions, because I'm at this every single day. You're going to be getting conference previews all throughout the offseason. You guys have already gotten, I believe, 7 or 8 conference preview podcasts. You get pretty much one every 5 days. So want to know what in between you want to be hearing there, because it's my job to make this the greatest college basketball season of all time and answer any sort of questions that you've got. But we've been wondering, when are some of these court cases going to be coming out, because the 5-and-5 rule is still sort of in limbo with college basketball. We thought that was going to be getting passed through in June. That didn't wind up happening, but you did see there was a filing for Jalen Washington and 11 other players in Tennessee seeking eligibility with the new NCAA age-based policy, and that was brought down on Monday. This was from Ross Ellinger, who was able to leak out the files, and the players involved in this, and some of these are hilarious: Alamadi Abajoy, hopefully I got that correct, Daniel Igbaniwe, Cameron Fenns, who was over at South Dakota last year, Shondell Weaver, a part of UT Arlington in Texas, Jason Edwards, who was part of Vanderbilt, Zachary Davis, he was, I believe, South Carolina, Terrence Gunyard, he was over at Duquesne, AJ Storr, which, that one made me laugh. AJ Storr has been with like 8 different schools in 8 different years, so yeah. Carly Keats, who I don't know who Carly Keats is, Brody Robinson, Jalen Washington, and Jack Browder. I don't know who Browder is, but I know a lot of these guys on the list, and they are looking to be able to have some eligibility, and they are looking to have it because I don't think that they entered in the transfer portal. They may or may not have, but I think that these are guys that did not enter into the transfer portal. This would open up a new big giant bag of worms, and there are some programs that still have like a spot or two eligible for these guys. There's a little bit of NIL money as well. I'm looking at you, Kansas, which we will talk a little bit about Kansas in segment number 2 with our good friend Ryan McIntyre when we dive in on the Big 12. I think that Big Blue Nation, Kentucky, could certainly use one of these guys as well, but I mean, this is just what you get with the NCAA. Do I think that these guys are actually going to be allowed to play this year? I'm thinking not. Like, you go back to the Charles Bediako case, and that was one where Charles Bediako was able to get out there for a few games, and then he was done. That was done within a few weeks, and maybe if they did this during the season, they'd be able to get in like a 1-off game, a 2-off games, because right now there might be an injunction for these guys to be had. But I mean, with this filing, I just don't think that they have a leg to stand on. These guys have just exhausted all their eligibility, aside from the guys that I mentioned. Like, I don't know who Carly Keats is. I don't know who Jack Browder is, but I'm sure that they've already used up their eligibility. I don't quite know there, but I do think that it's really interesting to see what is going to be happening here, because with the NCAA, they have been the Washington Generals of the court system. They just lose and lose and lose. The Charles Bediako case was like the lone W that they got, and I do think that that could be a little bit of, shall we say, a standard here, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the coming days, coming weeks, and we all knew that something like this was going to be happening. Let's call it what it is. Guys are always fishing for eligibility. We've had super duper 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 seniors over the last few years, and what else is super duper duper? Being able to get on our man, Ryan McIntyre, does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. He joins me next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSIN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSIN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSIN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSIN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSIN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSIN. Lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It's always great to be joined by this man as we've got Ryan McIntyre aboard. He does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. He and Kobe Dant do the show, The College Experience, and that takes a look at all things college sports, not just college basketball and college football, but they dabble in college baseball. When it comes to Frozen Four season, they do a great job on that front. Additionally, for those that love West Virginia athletics, he does the Ryan and Rush show that is dedicated to that because he is a man that is out there in the great state of West Virginia, and I know you're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at Moneyline_Mac, spelled M-A-C, and always love to get his perspective because he used to be on the coaching staff of West Virginia under Bob Huggins and South Carolina under Frank Martin, so a man that certainly knows his stuff, and my friend, it's always great to get you aboard. Thank you so much.
Greg, appreciate you having me.
I appreciate you joining me, and Ryan, certainly the offseason is coming to a little bit of a halt, but we still have some roster moves happening. We're seeing a few of these international men of mystery signing with teams, and we saw a big move that happened just before the 4th of July. It went under the radar because we've got a lot happening with the World Cup, Dusty May, what have you, but you had James Donaghy, who I thought was the biggest flop in all of college basketball last year, landing at George Mason. And did that do anything for you whatsoever? Because it's starting to see a man that was a part of the Karl Anthony Towns trade now signing with George Mason in early July. But I do feel like this could actually be a level of basketball where he should be able to go out there and dominate. And if he doesn't, I have some serious question marks.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I just don't know where his heart and head is at after all these moves. I mean, coming down to Baylor, the Big 12 from the NBA, being a complete flop, to your point. So worried that he's got too many miles on the tires maybe, and he's not as explosive as he used to be. So I think he's more at the right level for him now, but I still just question how good he really is. We haven't seen it at the college level.
Yep, exactly. And you do have to question as well. I don't know if you have this question, but how many of these international guys just have a difficulty adjusting to the college game? Because instead of 4 quarters, it's 2 halves. You've got a little bit of a different three-point line and just different rules in general. And I feel like that's been why some of these international players have been very hit or miss.
Yeah, and I think you could say the same when some guys go overseas for their professional careers. You see some college guys that weren't maybe as good have great and thrive overseas. Other guys that were great college players don't have the best pro careers. So it's all about your level, your fit. But yeah, these international guys have really struggled for the most part coming over to play college basketball.
No question. As we've got Ryan McIntyre, who does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And just where do you take a look at George Mason right now in the hierarchy of the Atlantic 10? Because I do think that for the A10, the dominant team out there is VCU. We saw what they were able to do in the NCAA tournament last year. They made some nice signings in the offseason, and I think that they get the Ric Flair mentality. In order to be the man, you've got to beat the man. But I mean, outside of that, I do think that's going to be an interesting Atlantic 10 with having St. Louis being so strong as well. Dayton, is always going to be there, but George Mason has really formed themselves as a top 5 team year in and year out in this conference.
Well, they really have an identity under Tony Skinn. They're going to be tough defensively, super physical. Yeah, they VCU, Dayton, and St. Louis definitely have more resources than them. But I feel like George Mason makes up for it with their identity and their brand of basketball, which reflects how Tony Skinn played when he was playing for Jim Larrañaga there. So I would say they're going to be a top 5 team, but they're definitely not in that top tier with those other programs that spend like they're at the high major level.
Yep, no question about it. And I do think that that's part of why I do think that Najee is a good fit as well, because for George Mason, they've got a lot of solid players on the roster, but they really needed that true 7-footer. They were missing that. And with having a slower style of play, unlike Baylor, they take a lot of threes, they play very much up-tempo, I feel like this actually could be a relatively okay fit for him.
Yeah, he could be their rim protector. Go up against some of that size that you see at VCU. VCU always has size, especially at the front court, multiple guys that they throw at you with all those athletes. So if there is a fit for Najee, if he's able to put things together, Mason Wood, I think, fit the bill here, playing under a defensive coach in Tony Skinn, too.
Yeah, because he was awful on the offensive end last season. He's not going to be a guy that's going to be giving them like 15 plus points per game, but do think that just with his sheer size alone, he might be able to give them a block. He might be able to give them a rebound, the old 10 minutes, 5 fouls sort of thing. As Ryan McIntyre, who does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I do think that Atlantic 10 landscape is so interesting because we talk about the top teams, but even a team like a George Washington is a team that I'm bullish on. I feel like Richmond has a little bit of an underrated, shall we say, offseason as well. And I want to get your thoughts on this conference as a whole, because even a team that was a bottom feeder for so long in Fordham under Mike Magpie, it looks like they're on the up and up. And while the Atlantic 10, I don't think that they're going to be on par with even like an ACC or something like that. They certainly have formed themselves as, in my opinion, perhaps at top outside the power conference in all of college basketball.
Yeah, the A10, it's a basketball league first and foremost. So you got programs that don't really worry about football as much, or just don't have football programs altogether. They've really had a nice run here of being a multiple bid league over the years. And last year they had a nice showing in the NCAA tournament. VCU obviously beats Carolina. St. Louis beat Georgia by about 1,000. So it was a nice showing for the A10 once again. And I think that they're going to get better and better in this landscape where a lot of these athletic departments are spending so much on football. The A10 doesn't have to worry about that. And I think a team like LaSalle, year 2 of Darius Nichols, they could make a jump. You already mentioned it with Fordham with Magpio. I think those are kind of programs that have been in the doormat during this, but they could make a little bit of jump and elevate this basement / middle tier here in the A10.
And how much do you take a look at some of these conferences that have struggled over the last few years, and you look at the bottom teams getting better? Because I felt like that was the key for the ACC for so long. These teams like Georgia Tech, Boston College have been so bad, and both of them made some nice coaching changes in the offseason. As we know, for the Atlantic 10, for the longest time, we just mentioned it with LaSalle and Fordham, they were just like quad 4 losses if you wound up taking them. I think that those teams getting just a little bit more solid, maybe not being like top 50 teams or anything like that, but just being a little bit more respectable, are some of the keys to these conferences outside the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, in terms of them being able to rise up the hierarchy of college basketball.
For sure, and I think the league you look at the mid-major level has been the Southland. The Southland was a dumpster for, 3, 4, 5 years ago? I mean, they have really improved, not just with the resurgence of McNeese and bring back Stephen F., but programs like Northwestern State, Lamar, Incarnate Word, Houston Christian, and others have really, Southeast Louisiana, I feel like have really gotten better, elevated that middle, and heck, even really elevated the basement in that league.
Oh, no question about it. And I would say the same thing about the Big South as well. Still have a little bit of work to do. The basement is still relatively rough there. Looking at you, Gardner Webb. But that said, the fact that you've got a school like a High Point, Longwood has been spending a lot of money. I think that that's been really key for them as well. And then a conference that is near and dear to you, I feel like the middle is getting much better out there in the Big 12 as well, because we saw all the coaching changes out there in the offseason. And now we've got some year 2 coaches with your guys over there at West Virginia certainly being one of them. And I want to get your outlook on the Big 12, because I don't know if they've been quite on par with, say, the Big 10 and the SEC over the last 2 seasons. And I do think that the SEC is going to be so hard to catch this year. You just look at all the money being spent there. My goodness gracious. But still, I look at this Big 12 and I really do think that this is going to be a strong conference. And maybe they won't have that number 1 team, but I think that they're going to have a ton of teams in that top 15, top 20.
Agreed, Greg. And you mentioned it. We get some year 2 coaches. I have big expectations for my local team, my alma mater, Ross Hodge and Company. I think they're set here to make a jump in the NCAA tournament after winning the crown. And I think you look at a team like Steve Lutz in Oklahoma State. They dipped their toes in there last year. They showed flashes that they could be a candidate that could put it together here. Obviously, you got the year 1 head coaches, Tempe, Cincinnati, and K-State. So I think all those will be chippy and they'll be competitive. But the Big 12, I mean, that top tier is still tough. I mean, Kansas is loaded again. Houston's loaded again. Iowa State, Arizona. You got to imagine Baylor's going to bounce back. I mean, they just won a national championship 4 or 5 years ago. I don't anticipate them missing the NCAA tournament again.
Yep, I'm right there with you. And I do think that the interesting team is going to be Kansas, because with Kansas, they weren't necessarily the most aggressive team in the transfer transfer portal, and I've been waiting on them to try to pursue one of those Michigan guys personally, but it doesn't look like that's going to be happening. But how do you take a look at a lineup that Tyron Stokes, him being a top 5 recruit going on over to Kansas, is going to be big, but I do have a few question marks with regards to the backcourt around him with the likes of Leroy Blyden Jr. and Tylen Kinney coming over as a freshman as well.
Greg, it definitely feels like Kansas is more under the radar this year than they have been in the years past, whether it was the Darren Peterson experiment that last year that frustrated pretty much everybody, Kansas fans or non-Kansas fans, or just you wanted to watch a game and you turn on and he's not playing. And then the year before that, Hunter Dickinson, they've struggled with their identity in this portal era. So I think that they're going to be closer back to what they used to be because I think they're going to be good defensively. They got good size around the rim. But I think they're still going to be a work in progress as Bill Self tries to navigate this new era while his health is always a question mark now, it seems like.
Yep, and how much do you think that it has been an attribution of a lot of these more veteran coaches? Like, you even take a look at Baylor and what has been happening with them, of just a changing landscape, because it does feel like some of these coaches have not been able to keep up with it. And we know with so many of these guys like Jay Wright, all those coaches out there in the ACC, like Jim Boeheim and company, stepping down, that it might not be for some of these old school coaches.
I think you hit the nail right on the head. They've struggled, and heck, a lot of them are now retiring. And we see Dutsu May, he's not even old. He jumped to the NBA. So it's definitely an interesting time. It's not for everybody, clearly, but it's not going anywhere. So you don't really have a choice. You either adapt or you retire.
Yep, I'm right there with you. And then that top team in the conference, I think, is going to be a very interesting debate because you always just look at Houston, and I felt like Houston almost got away from their identity a little bit last year. They weren't as great on glass as they have been in the past, but I look at Deion Thomas, who's going to be coming over. That's rock solid. I love the fact that they picked up Delreco Gillespie, who was oh so good over at Kent State in the MAC last season. And I'm not sure about you, but I think that this is going to be a better season for them, even though they might not have as much fanfare with the freshmen and the backcourt, just because it feels like more of a Houston roster than it was a season ago.
I agree. They kind of were boomer bust, I felt like last year, was making shots from the perimeter. So I think they get more back to their identity here. I never want to bet against Kelvin Sampson. So I know they were disappointed with the way the season ended, losing in the Big 12 title game. But I anticipate them being right back there, competing for a Big 12 title and then eventually a Final Four national championship.
I'm right there with you, as we do have Ryan McIntyre of the Sports Gambling Podcast Network joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I always love to ask you this open-ended question because we are in the offseason. Now a lot of these rosters have been fortified, unless if you're George Mason bringing in James Nanji, which that's not going to move things too much. But I mean, is there a team or two that you're right now looking at in the national landscape that isn't getting the love that they deserve and you feel like might surprise a lot of people for this upcoming season?
That's a great question. I don't know if they're really flying under the radar. I just think that it's hard to poke holes at them right now. That's going to be Florida. Florida coming off the disappointing loss to Iowa after they win the national championship. They bring back their entire front court, but bring back 4 out of 5 starters, bring back Aberdeen from Kentucky. It's hard to poke holes at that Todd Golden team right now. So if I had to choose right now, my team to beat, target on their back, I would probably go with Florida to win their second national championship in 3 years, just like Villanova did a couple years back.
Yep, and it's going to be interesting to see if they'll be able to pull through on that as well. And then how do you take a look at a team that's had so much heartbreak over the last few years and has been so strong in Duke? Because I do feel like with Duke, they might actually be the second most talented team in all of college basketball. I don't think that you could put anyone over Florida, but we have just seen time and time again, sometimes they're just a little bit too young. And in this day and age where you've got so many seniors, super seniors, and however many supers you want to throw in there for seniors, because they just seem to be getting eligibility like as many plates as you want at the dinner buffet. But that said, I feel like that's really been costing them, and a big reason why they've had back-to-back heartbreaks in the NCAA tournament.
We got to start questioning John Shire a little bit with some of these collapses. Houston and UConn back-to-back years. I mean, they've really let 2 golden opportunities slip where they've had the number 1 player in the country or then multiple guys that are lottery picks right around them, whether it's Cooper Flagg or Caden Boozer. So it's definitely been disappointing for Duke in March these last couple of years. They'll be right at the top of the ACC. I don't anticipate anybody really knocking them off, but it's kind of national championship or bust at this point for John Shire and company. But it was the same way for Coach K for a while at the beginning of his career.
Yep, I'm right there with you, and it's going to be a really interesting landscape. We're trying to decipher all these rosters as now they're for the most part fortified, and a show that is always fortified is the Sports Gambling Podcast. I work on the college experience on there. You and Kobe Dant do a tremendous job with that. I know you also do a great job with West Virginia Athletics over at the Ryan Rush Show, and I know you and Kobe are getting set for some college football as well. So love the good people at home. Know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yes, appreciate it, Greg. Yeah, go follow us at the College Experience all year round. In the middle of our 138 previews, we are starting up our coaches series here this week, so make sure you tune into that. And yeah, College Hoops will be ready to rock and roll before we know it, and let's go.
Absolutely. And Ryan, every single time he joins me, lends such great insight. So big thanks to Ryan for joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via the 5-star review. You can expect a fresh podcast every day moving forward. We're over 2,400 straight days without a missed podcast, so we're going to keep that going. You're going to get great guests all throughout the offseason. Now, we are pretty much done with the transfer portal. We'll see if we get any news with regards to some of those Michigan guys, if one or two of them decides to transfer, but you're now getting all these conference previews as well. I think I'm already through 8, might be one more, might be one less, but I typically do like one every 5 or so days. Next up is going to be the Ivy League. I'll try to have that by week's end. I need to find a great guest for that, but be on the lookout there, and be on the lookout for me trying to make this the greatest college basketball season ever, and then once we get games once again, fix it analysis on every single game, every single day. So appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.